The December storm had come without warning, a wall of rain that beat against the glass facade of the Harrison mansion with such fury it seemed the sky itself wanted to break inside. Sheets of water streamed down the towering windows, distorting the garden lamps into bleeding halos. Inside, Emma Harrison sat curled in her velvet armchair, her small legs tucked neatly beneath her, her pale hands gliding across the raised filigree on the lid of a porcelain music box. The melody chimed softly, each note a tiny light in the cavernous dark of the sitting room. Emma tilted her head, listening to the storm's low growl. She could not see the lightning, but she felt it ripple through her body, the thunder rolling through the marble floor and into her bones. She pressed her lips together, steadying herself. To the world, she was blind. To her father, she was the secret he never spoke of. "Daddy will be home soon, sweetheart," Maria whispered. Her voice was warm, but even at 7 years old, Emma heard the hesitation beneath it. The nanny's hands trembled as she set down a tray of tea. The china rattled. Emma turned her unseeing eyes toward her, the way a flower turns toward the sun. "Maria," she asked softly, "do you think Daddy is ashamed of me?" The words hung in the air, heavy as the storm clouds. Maria froze, then dropped to her knees beside Emma. She pressed the girl's small hand between her palms. "Oh no, mi cielo, don't think that. Your father loves you more than anything in this world." But Emma's chin quivered. She had overheard the phone calls, the pauses in conversations when she entered the room, the polite voices that turned brittle, uneasy. She knew she was hidden, a secret behind glass walls, her father's treasure and his shame. 8 blocks away, the storm did not sound like a lullaby. It was a weapon, pelting the alley where Danny Miller crouched behind a Dente D dumpster. The cold bit through his threadbare hoodie as the wind tried to shove him out of his hiding place. At 8 years old, Danny had already spent 4 months on the streets. The car accident had taken his parents, his home, his childhood, leaving him with nothing but a backpack, a half-broken watch, and something his mother once called the knowing dot. It wasn't sight, not really. It was sensation, waves of emotion that coursed through him like static electricity. Lies burned like sparks. Anger felt like fire in his veins. Sadness pressed against his chest like a weight. Tonight, as the storm screamed through the city, he felt it pulling him toward the iron gates of the Harrison estate. The closer he crept, the heavier the dread became, until it felt like the mansion itself was crying out in pain. Dot! He slipped through the bars like smoke, his skinny frame disappearing into the dripping hedges. Security cameras dotted the walls, but Danny had long ago learned the art of vanishing from sightlines. Hunger gnawed at him, but instinct drove him forward. Something was wrong here, terribly wrong. Through the veil of rain, he spotted her, a girl in a velvet chair framed by the glittering interior, motionless except for her hands tracing the music box. Her face was pale, her eyes open, yet strangely aware. She turned toward Maria before the nanny even spoke. Then, when lightning tore the sky, her pupils constricted in the flash. Danny's gift surged, filling his small body with a buzzing certainty. "She's not blind," he whispered to the storm, his breath fogging against the cold glass. Inside, Emma flinched. She raised her head, listening, and then, almost impossibly, tilted it directly toward the boy hidden in the rain. Their eyes met, though one pair was supposed to be blind. For a heartbeat, the storm went silent. And somewhere between the mansion's marble floors and the dumpster in the alley, fate quietly shifted. A sheltered girl, a broken father, a runaway with a secret, 3 lives about to collide. None of them knew that the storm pounding outside was only the beginning. The storm did not relent. It beat harder against the streets, hammering puddles into silver explosions, rattling the city's forgotten corners. In the narrow alleyway near the Harrison estate, Danny Miller pressed his back against cold brick, pulling his ragged hoodie tighter around his small shoulders. Water dripped from the edges of his matted hair, down the bruised lines of his face. He had grown used to the bite of hunger, the way it sharpened everything, but tonight it was something else that gnawed at him. It was the hum. That strange, invisible vibration he felt whenever someone nearby was hiding something. His mother had called it the knowing, whispering about it during the rare nights when they still had a roof over their heads. "You don't see like other people, Danny," she had said once, brushing his hair back. "You feel the truth in them. It's a gift, baby. A dangerous gift, but a gift." Since the accident, that gift had grown louder, sharper, sometimes so strong it rattled his skull. Tonight, as the rain slashed down, the hum turned into a roar when he wandered past the gilded gates of the Harrison mansion. The building shone like a jewel in the storm, its many windows reflecting lightning across the wet pavement. But it wasn't the lights that made Danny's pulse race. It was the weight pressing against his chest, the static crawling under his skin. Someone inside was hurting. Someone inside was lying. He crept through a gap in the hedges, his thin sneakers squelching in the mud. The security camera should have caught him, but he knew how to avoid their gaze. He had practiced that dance countless times, slipping past officers and night guards who thought him invisible only because he wanted to be crouching by a marble column. He looked through one of the wide windows. At first, he saw only shadows, the stormlight breaking across chandeliers and polished wood. Then, he spotted her. A girl, maybe his age, sat perfectly still in an enormous velvet chair. Her hands wandered across a delicate porcelain music box, tracing its carvings with the precision of someone reading Braille. The tune chimed faint and haunting, weaving with the storm's howls. Her eyes were open but strangely unfocused. She tilted her head toward the nanny who murmured reassurances. "Your father will be home soon, sweetheart," the woman whispered. Emma's voice, small and trembling, broke the silence. "Maria, do you think Daddy is ashamed of me?" Danny froze. The words carried a weight that made his chest burn. He could feel the ache in her voice, the quiet loneliness that mirrored his own nights under dripping fire escapes. But then something happened that made his breath catch. A heavy book toppled from a side table and struck the polished marble with a thud. Before the sound had fully died, Emma's head turned sharply toward it. Too fast, too precise. Her pupils constricted in the flicker of lightning. Danny's gift surged like a lightning strike in his skull. She sees. She wasn't blind at all. The world had lied to her, or forced her to lie to herself. His fingers trembled as he picked up a smooth stone from the wet garden path. He tapped it gently against the glass. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3. The ancient code his mother had taught him. Essos. Emma stiffened in her chair. Slowly, she lifted her chin and turned, not toward the sound, but straight toward him. Her eyes found his in the rain-smeared reflection, and for the first time in months, Danny felt something other than hunger and fear. He felt recognition. Inside. Maria gasped, nearly dropping the teacup she held. Emma's lips parted. Her voice was steady now, almost defiant. "Daddy's not ashamed of me," she whispered. "He's afraid, and so am I." Danny's pulse hammered. His gift burned brighter, louder. He didn't know why, but he understood one thing with terrifying clarity. The secret in this house wasn't just about blindness. It was about power. And tonight, that power was about to crack the storm wide open. The mansion's front doors thundered open with a crash that drowned even the storm. James Harrison stood in the entryway, drenched and trembling, his eyes darting wildly as if shadows themselves were predators. His Italian shoes squeaked against the marble floor, leaving a trail of water behind him. "Where is she?" His voice was a whip crack, sharp with fury, but laced with a tremor of fear. Maria flinched, nearly spilling the tea she'd been pouring. "In the sitting room, sir. She's been waiting all evening. She's worried." Emma's fingers froze on the music box. She tilted her head toward the doorway, her pale eyes wide. Danny, crouched outside in the storm, pressed his palms harder against the glass, his chest burning with the electric hum of the knowing. The current inside him screamed that James's rage wasn't directed at his daughter at all. It was fear. The billionaire wasn't afraid for Emma, he was afraid because of her. James crossed the room in long, frantic strides and knelt before his daughter. His hands shook as he grasped hers. His eyes, once photographed on the covers of Forbes and Wired, were wild now, as though he hadn't slept in weeks. "Emma," he whispered, voice cracking, "we're leaving tonight, right now. Pack only what you can carry. We don't have time." Emma's lips parted in confusion. "Leaving? But Daddy, this is home. This is where we're safe." James let out a short, bitter laugh, a sound that carried no joy. "Home is where they can't find us, and they're close, too close. We're out of time." Danny felt it then, the surge of panic rolling off James like heat. His body shook with the force of it, his gift translating the man's emotions into jagged shards of electricity across his skin. And beneath it all was something darker, a secret so heavy James could hardly stand beneath its weight. Danny pressed the stone to the window again. Tap, 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 faster this time, louder, frantic. Emma's head whipped toward him. She stood from her chair without hesitation, her feet gliding across the carpet, not stumbling, not groping, her steps were sure. Danny's breath caught. She knows where everything is. James spun, following his daughter's gaze, and for the first time saw the boy pressed against the glass. Their eyes met. Danny didn't look away. He let James see the storm in him, the truth burning behind his dark irises. "You shouldn't be here," James hissed, striding toward the side door. He yanked it open, and the rain swept in with him. Danny stood his ground in the garden, his thin shirt plastered to his chest. "I had to come," he said. "I know what's happening in there. I know she can see." James froze, as if the boy had pointed a gun instead of words. His knees nearly buckled. For a moment, he looked like he might collapse into the mud. "You don't know what you're saying," he rasped. "You don't understand." "I do," Danny said, stepping closer. His voice was small but steady. "You're not hiding her because she's blind. You're hiding her because someone told her to pretend." The billionaire's face drained of color. "How could you possibly—" "Because I can feel it," Danny interrupted, clutching his chest as the storm's charge pulsed inside him. "Someone scared her. Someone scared you. You've been living in fear and he's still out there." Before James could respond, a second crash echoed from the front hall. The sound of splintering wood, heavy boots on marble. A voice like broken glass cut through the storm. "James!" Victor Castillo stepped into the light, his tailored suit immaculate despite the rain, his expression a predator's grin. Behind him loomed three men in tactical gear, rifles hidden beneath coats. James rose, placing himself between Emma and the door. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, though his voice shook. "Oh, I should be everywhere you are," Victor sneered, lifting a sleek black device wired into a modified radio. "You think you can keep running? You think you can hide her forever?" His eyes flicked toward Emma. "Tonight, James, the game changes." Danny's gift howled inside him, each heartbeat a drumbeat of dread. He could feel Victor's emotions, not calm, not controlled. Beneath the grin was something frantic, something unraveling. "Do what I say," Victor barked, raising the device, "or your little girl finds out what real blindness feels like." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Oat." Maria dropped the teacup, and James, soaked, exhausted, and terrified, had to choose between running once again or facing the monster who had built his empire on secrets. The storm outside raged louder, as if the sky itself demanded an answer. The storm had not eased. Thunder rolled like artillery across the night sky, rattling the chandeliers overhead, as if the heavens themselves were at war. In the marble foyer of the Harrison mansion, James stood rigid, water dripping from his expensive suit onto the pristine floor, his body angled protectively between Victor Castillo and his daughter. Victor's men spread out behind him, boots squeaking against the polished stone. Their eyes scanned every corner, rifles tucked close to their shoulders. Outside, lightning forked, casting the entire room in sudden bursts of white. For a fleeting moment, Emma's pupils constricted again, an impossible movement that confirmed what Danny had whispered. She could see. James felt the weight of his secret crack his ribs from the inside. For 2 years he had carried the lie that his daughter was blind. He had whispered the story to investors, to the press, even to his own employees, knowing full well it wasn't true. He had told himself it was for her safety. But Danny's strange, fever-hot presence at his side left him feeling exposed, as though the walls he'd built were made of paper. Victor held the black device like a priest raising a relic. Its edges gleamed with embedded circuits, pulsing in sync with a sinister rhythm. "You know what this is, James," he said, his voice silk wrapped around steel. "One signal and your little girl will wish she had stayed blind. Or worse, she'll never open her eyes again." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Emma stiffened in her chair but didn't stumble, didn't grope, didn't flinch. She placed the music box down carefully and whispered, "Daddy, don't listen. He's lying." Danny's chest convulsed. The knowing roared inside him, hot and sharp. He pressed his palm against the marble wall to steady himself. The lie Victor had spoken burned bright red across his mind, but not all of it. The man was desperate, yes. He was bluffing, yes. But there was truth buried under the threat, like a razor wrapped in silk. "He's lying," Danny said, his small voice cutting through the echo of thunder. "Not about everything. He can't hurt the others, not the way he says, but he can hurt her. That machine's real." James's breath caught. He turned toward his daughter, his heart a vice in his chest. "Emma, sweetheart, is it true? Did they put something inside you?" For the first time in years, Emma lifted her head fully. The mask of blindness fell away. Her pale blue eyes, wide open, flickered with lightning and with something else. A glow, faint but unmistakable, like circuitry coming alive behind her pupils. "I can feel it," she whispered into the storm. The words carried through the mansion's intercom, trembling and clear. "They've been in my head since I was little. I thought I was broken, but it was never me. It was them." Victor's smirk faltered. "Quiet," he barked, pressing his thumb harder against the transmitter. A hiss of static flared from the device. One push, Harrison, and she's finished. 30 seconds, that's all you have. The screen on his tablet lit up with a red countdown. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 30 seconds. James's knees threatened to give out again, but Danny was already moving, dragging him back toward the command console in the study. He's bluffing about the others, the boy said quickly, his eyes almost glowing with intensity. He only has the men out front. No, one is at your brother's house. No one is at Emma's school. He wants you scared, so you'll do what he says. How do you know that? James demanded, his fingers flying across the keyboard to pull up live feeds. Because I feel him. He's angry. He's scared. He doesn't want you to know how weak he really is. Danny's voice trembled but didn't falter. The screens flickered as James hacked into the city's traffic camera network, something he'd been quietly building toward for months. There, he whispered. A thermal feed came into focus. Victor's van parked 3 blocks away. Only 4 heat signatures inside. No other signals in the city. Danny had been right. Emma's voice echoed again through the intercom, steady and unshaken now. Daddy, he's been lying to us for 2 years. I can see him. I can see you. I don't want to pretend anymore. James turned, stunned. For the first time since the explosion, he looked into his daughter's eyes and saw her gaze lock with his, clear and steady. It was like staring into Lisa's eyes again, like being pulled back to a time before the fire, before the blackmail, before the walls of the mansion became their prison. Emma. His throat closed around her name. He wanted to fall apart, to weep at her feet, to beg forgiveness for every moment he'd let her live as a ghost. But the timer was ticking down. 0 o'clock, 1-2. Then, the storm outside roared to a new pitch. Every light on the estate suddenly flickered, then died, plunging the mansion into darkness. The guards at the front door shouted in alarm. Victor snarled, raising the transmitter high like a blade. And then, from the shadows, another voice entered the battle. James. It was calm, steady, unmistakable, a woman's voice. For a moment, James thought his mind had finally broken. He turned, and in the glow of a single emergency light stood a figure in a soaked trench coat, hood pulled low. Her hands clutched a sealed folder, the edges warped from the rain. When she lowered her hood, the world seemed to stop. Lisa? James's voice cracked open, raw and unbelieving. His face went pale as if he'd seen a ghost. Emma gasped audibly from the safe room, her eyes flooding with tears she wasn't supposed to be able to see. Victor's grin vanished. For the first time, the predator looked like prey. His thumb hovered, trembling now, above the transmitter switch. Impossible, he whispered, his voice breaking. You're supposed to be dead. Lisa stepped fully into the light, her face worn but her gaze burning with iron fire. She raised the folder slowly, her voice slicing through the storm. No, Victor. I've been alive all along, and I've been watching you. The countdown on the device hit 0 o'clock, 05. James turned back to Danny, desperation and a flicker of hope warring in his eyes. Danny's gift flared like a storm breaking inside him, and he whispered, He's not in control anymore. He doesn't want you to know, but he's terrified of what she can do. James swallowed hard. He looked at Emma, then at Lisa, then at the boy who had stepped out of the rain and into their lives. For the first time in years, James Harrison stood tall. His voice was steady, sharp, and merciless. Sometimes, Mr. Castillo, he said, his eyes burning into Victor's, the truth doesn't knock. It barges in. And outside, the sirens drew closer. The red numbers on Victor's device burned 5 seconds into the dark like an angry eye. Rain hurled itself at the windows. Somewhere in the house, a pipe ticked. Once, twice, like a metronome refusing to pick up the panic. Lisa lowered her hood. Water ran in thin threads down her jaw, but her eyes were dry, fixed on the transmitter in Victor's hand as if she could peel it open with a glance. You don't want to press that, she said. Victor laughed and it came out wrong. Too bright, too brittle. You were a good ghost, Lisa. Stay one. His thumb tightened. Emma's voice rose through the intercom, a wire pulled taut. Mom, James moved without deciding to. Half a step toward Lisa, half a step back toward the console, body split by years of fear. Danny grabbed his sleeve. Listen, the boy whispered. He's more scared of her than of you. 4 seconds. Lisa lifted the rain-warped folder. The seal tore. A sheaf of paper slid free. Schematics, code printouts, a photo of a tiny lattice of metal no bigger than a grain of rice. She spoke evenly, like a surgeon calling for instruments. Frequency map, early prototype. Your bosses rushed it, Victor. You cut the safeties. He sneered, but Danny felt the shake that ran through him like a wire plucked too hard. The knowing flashed hot up Danny's spine. Terror, sharp and metallic. He's hoping the bluff holds because the device might eat his hand. 3 seconds. James. Lisa didn't look away from Victor. The music box. He blinked. What? Emma's music box. I used its melody to train her neural rhythms after the hospital. It's a key, not a toy. Lisa finally turned, voice softening, words meant for a little girl through 1,000 miles of static. Swan, spiral, treble. Do you remember? Emma's breath caught over the speaker. Swan, spiral, treble. 2 seconds. Victor's jaw clenched. Don't. 1, Emma whispered and began to hum. It was barely a sound, more breath than note, but the house felt it. The chandeliers trembled, the console monitors blipped. Danny felt it most, a low ripple rolling across his skin like warm water, pulling the storm's noise into a line. His head cleared. The panic tones woven through Victor's voice fell away and left something skeletal and obvious. She's sinking, Lisa said. James, open the local net, give her everything. James's hands found the keyboard as if they'd been waiting there for years. Windows bloomed across the screen, security cameras, traffic cams, the smart grid control panel he'd slipped into the city contract, his ugly little insurance policy against a world that liked to set his life on fire. .0. Victor pressed . The transmitter hiccuped. A hiss rose, a squall of static, and then feedback, screaming through the circuits. The device spat a bright bead of blue-white light and died, the smell of burnt tin and rain-soaked wool rushing into the foyer. Victor stared at the black box like it had betrayed him personally. No. From the ceiling speakers, Emma laughed. It was a small, astonished sound that tasted like sun after a winter of cloud. I can feel you, she said into the open net, not just to Victor, not just to James, but to everything humming within 5 blocks, streetlights, refrigerators, the municipal weather vane. And you can feel me back, can't you? On the console, a graph unfurled, wave meeting wave, then swallowing it. Emma took the signal meant to break her and braided it to her heartbeat. The emergency lights along the corridor pulsed to that rhythm. The front gate locks clicked to it. Victor snapped his fingers. Do it, he barked, and his men moved, 2 toward James, 1 toward the study, 1 toward Emma's safe room hall. Don't, Danny said, and for a second they didn't. The word carried more weight than a child should. He saw their pathing in his head the way a chess player sees 4 moves deep, the rifle butt coming up, the angle to James's ribs, the stumble over the wet marble. He slid along the wall and slapped the console's manual lockdown. Steel shutters fell like guillotines over the side doors, the smart glass fogged, and the house went from mansion to bunker in a heartbeat. Police are 3 minutes out, James said, eyes on a traffic cam feed that showed a string of patrol cars sprinting up the hill. I lit the emergency grid. Every camera has your face now, Victor. And the whole neighborhood, Lisa added. She lifted a second object from the folder, a small, ugly fob with 3 prongs. Do you recognize this? A development tether. Yours were never calibrated for live override, but you couldn't resist testing, could you? On children. Victor's smile returned in a thin, murderous line. He took a step, then stopped. Stopped because the house itself seemed to grow teeth. Floodlights outside boomed on, bathing the driveway in cold noon. A horn blared, a long, brassy animal sound from the street. That sound had driven half the city's mornings for 20 years. The yellow school bus loomed across the driveway, hazard lights strobing, the red stop arm cocked like a shield. Rafe Moreno sat behind the wheel, rain blowing in through the cracked window, his jaw set hard enough to hurt. He had seen the van on his way off shift, seen men with hard eyes get out and melt toward the big house with the glass bones. He had kept driving 30 yards, then turned around, because some days you are allowed to be the person you tell the mirror you are. He pulled the bus sideways across the gate like a drawbridge slammed shut. One of Victor's men swore, "We've got company." "We've got witnesses," Rafe corrected into the bus PA, his voice echoing down the quiet street. He hit the exterior cam broadcast. He didn't know much about tech, but he knew how to aim a lens. Every mother with a child at his stop who still followed the Root app just got a push notification labeled live.inside. Emma's hum deepened. The walls thrummed. Danny clutched the console edge, eyes shining as if he could see the lines of intention moving through the house. "Left," he shouted, and James pivoted. The rifle swung past him and cracked into a column instead. Marble chipped. The man yelped. Lisa stepped into him and drove her elbow into the soft hinge of his arm. The gun clattered. Maria, trembling, kicked it under a cabinet with surprising fury. Victor bolted for the study, toward the side door he thought would still be open. It wasn't. He pounded the steel shutter. "Open it!" he screamed at his men. "Shoot it!" "You won't shoot," Danny said, voice flat. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. "You signed up for ghosts, not families on camera." Sirens swelled, closer, closer, blue lights painting the rain. On the bus, Rafe killed the engine and stood in the stairwell, a silhouette in the red pulse of the stop sign. The van tried to back into him. He leaned on the air brakes and the bus hissed like a thing that liked to fight. Victor turned back to the foyer, hair hanging wet across his forehead, the mask fully off now. He looked smaller without it. He looked almost human. "Where is she?" he hissed, as if Emma wasn't inside the wires, inside the light, inside the rhythm of the house. "Where is your little miracle?" Emma answered by opening every screen in a 5-block radius. TVs in bedrooms and diners, tablets on kitchen counters, phones in pockets, Rafe's route app, the traffic cam kiosk at the corner. Her face appeared, 7 years old, rain light reflected in her eyes, her voice steady. "My name is Emma Harrison," she said, "and for 2 years bad people have been hurting me and children like me. They told me to pretend I couldn't see. They put machines in my head and told my daddy to be afraid. I'm not afraid anymore." Victor lunged at James. James had spent 2 years gripping fear like a rope. He let go. The punch he threw landed with the sound of something old cracking. Victor reeled into the newel post, swore, and drove his shoulder like a battering ram into James's ribs. James went down hard, but the house caught him, a shutter thudding just where his head would have struck marble. Police poured through the front, guns low, voices of braided command. "Hands! Hands! Down!" Victor reached for the dead transmitter on instinct, habit returning to an empty weapon, and froze as 3 red dots stacked on his chest. "Victor Castillo," Lisa said softly, stepping to the edge of the light. "Say something for the cameras. Tell them you made a mistake." She lifted the fob. "Tell them you cut the safeties." He stared at her like a man looking up from the bottom of a well. For the first time, Danny felt no plan in him, no angle, just the flat, leaden thud of a life that had finally run to the end of its corridors. He put his hands up. It should have ended there. Sometimes justice does the courtesy of being simple, but as the cuffs clicked, as the house's pulse eased, as Rafe lowered into the driver's seat with shaking hands and let out a breath he wasn't sure he'd earned, Emma gasped over the speakers. "Daddy, there are others," she whispered. Her voice wasn't in the house anymore, it was far. 17, I can feel 17. They're scared. They're waking up because I woke up. Lisa's head snapped toward the console. She crossed the room in 3 strides and slid in beside James, fingers flying, eyes a map of old pain and new fire. "They'll trigger a purge," she said, the words too calm for the meaning. "If one node goes free, the others fail safe. They'll fry them to protect the project." James's hands hovered over the keys. "Where?" Lisa didn't answer with a coordinate. She answered with a memory, her voice so gentle it hurt. "Emma, do you remember the cicada song? In the garden? Humming when you couldn't sleep?" Emma's hum returned, higher now, overlaying the house's systems with a pattern that made the graphs on the monitor knit into a ladder. Danny caught his breath. The shapes meant something. He couldn't have explained why, but his gift read the fear trails in the signal like footprints in fresh snow. "Desert," he whispered. "Metal roof, air that tastes like coins." He pointed at a blinking node on the map Lisa had coaxed onto the screen. "There." Lisa's eyes shone. "He's right." She tapped the dot. A label popped. A logistics shell company outside Ely, Nevada. "They kept me there until last month." James looked from the screen to his daughter's face on 100 borrowed windows, to Lisa's wet hair and steady hands, to the boy who had walked out of the rain and taught him what truth felt like. He stood, every decision he'd failed to make in 2 years collapsing into one. "We're going," he said. The nearest officer glanced over, mouth drawn. "Sir, with respect." "You'll have my evidence packet in 10 minutes, James said, already sending it. Every contract, every hash, every line of code that shouldn't exist compressed into a single artery of light. But those kids have maybe hours. I'm not asking permission." Rafe pulled the bus key from the ignition and looked up as they came down the steps together. Billionaire, scientist, child, and boy with a storm behind his eyes. He wasn't sure when he decided to speak, but the words were there when his mouth opened. "I've got a bus and a tank of diesel," he said, "and an old friend who owes me a favor at a private strip." James blinked, then nodded like men do at the end of wars. "Drive." They moved, past the shattered teacup and the dead transmitter, past the red smear of countdown numbers burned into one man's memory forever. As they reached the door, Emma's face lingered on every screen, a lighthouse turning for ships that hadn't known they were lost. "Hold on," she told the 17 points of light only she could feel. "We're coming." Across the city, in a room without windows, a man who had never needed to raise his voice touched a control and leaned forward into a bank of screens. He watched the girls' broadcast, then the map blooming on James's console, then the bus rolling out into the rain with its stop sign still extended like a warning. "Interesting," he said to no one at all and smiled without warmth. "Begin contingency." The desert night was merciless, a silence broken only by the whine of engines as the yellow school bus rattled off the cracked Nevada highway. The storm was behind them now, left thrashing against the California coast, but its memory lingered in every heartbeat. Ahead, a warehouse loomed in the middle of nothing, steel walls gleaming under the half-moon, like a coffin planted in sand. Emma sat by the window, her small hands pressed flat against the glass. Her eyes weren't blind anymore, not to the world, not to herself. They shone faintly, twin reflections of something larger humming inside her. "They're in there," she whispered. Her voice carried a resonance that made the bus windows tremble. "All 17, I can feel them screaming." James gripped the metal bar above his seat, staring at the outline of the compound. He had stormed boardrooms and dictated futures to governments, but tonight he was just a father. "We get in, we get them out, nothing else matters." Lisa stood in the aisle, clutching the stolen tether device Victor had once used. Her face was tired, lined with years of captivity, but her mind was razor sharp. "They built redundancies," she warned. "Every implant is linked to a failsafe system. If the lab senses tampering, it'll fry the children's brains like overloaded circuits." Danny raised his head. His dark eyes burned with that strange electricity, the knowing thrumming in his bones. "They're not circuits. They're scared kids. I can feel it. Like 1,000 little fists banging on the inside of a glass wall. They're waiting for someone to open the door." Rafe cleared his throat from the driver's seat. His hands trembled on the wheel, but his voice was steady. "We don't have an army, just a bus, a brain, a boy, and a girl who shouldn't be able to do half the things she does. We'll need a miracle." "Then we make one," Emma said softly, faces slack with overconfidence. This wasn't a fortress, it was a prison nobody thought anyone would dare storm. James moved first, pulling Danny and Emma close as Lisa whispered instructions. Rafe stayed with the bus, its hazard lights blinking faintly in the dark, ready to drive through the gates if things went wrong. They reached the side door undetected. Lisa keyed in a code from memory. The steel clicked open with a sigh, revealing the nightmare inside. Rows of white-walled cells stretched across the warehouse, each one holding a child strapped to a medical chair, wires burrowed into. Oh, their temples, tiny chests rising and falling with mechanical precision. Monitors beeped in time with brainwaves mapped in shimmering patterns on glass screens. Danny staggered back, clutching his chest. His gift screamed, voices crashing into him like a flood. Fear, pain, hope. Too much. Too many. Emma touched his shoulder, her own implants humming like a tuning fork. The weight lessened instantly, shared between them. "I can feel them too," Emma whispered. "They're not alone anymore." Lisa was already at the central console, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Every implant runs through this mainframe. If we can trick it into thinking the system's safe while we cut the connections, they'll live," James finished, his voice hoarse. He stepped behind her, placing his hand over hers, steadying the tremor. But Danny shook his head. "It's not that simple. The system doesn't just watch them, it listens to them. Their fear keeps it alive. That's the real failsafe." He looked at Emma, his voice breaking. "You have to change the story inside their heads. You have to make them feel safe, even for just a second." Emma's face went pale. 17 children's minds, 17 locked prisons, and she was supposed to walk into all of them at once? Lisa crouched beside her daughter, her hands on Emma's cheeks. "You've been doing this your whole life without knowing it, sweetheart. Every time you pretended to be blind, every time you tricked them into believing you were broken, you were controlling the story. Now tell a new one. Tell them they're free." Emma closed her eyes. The glow behind her lids pulsed brighter. She took Danny's hands. The room shifted, humming, lights flickering, as if the warehouse itself was holding its breath. And then Emma was inside. She found herself standing in a white corridor stretching infinitely in both directions. Doors lined the walls, each one humming with a faint child's cry. Behind every door, a boy or girl sat in a chair, eyes wide with terror. Danny stood beside her. Not really there, but there enough. "We're in the network," he said, his voice echoing like thunder through the dream corridor. "It's built from their fear. Change that, and we win. Emma reached for the first door. Her fingers brushed the handle, and she felt the child's panic burn through her. She shut her eyes and whispered, "You're safe. You're not alone." The door dissolved, and the child's scream turned into a sob of relief. One by one, she moved down the hall, touching doors, whispering freedom, dissolving walls of terror into air. 17 doors, 17 children. But with each one, the network fought back harder. Shadows rose along the corridor, faceless things that hissed with Victor's voice, with his boss's orders. "You can't fight us. You're just a child." Emma faltered. Her hands shook. The shadows loomed. But then Danny stepped forward, his small body glowing with the storm of his knowing. "They're lying," he said. His voice boomed across the corridor, rattling the shadows into dust. "They've always been lying." The last door opened. A girl no older than 6 stepped out, her eyes wide, her face streaked with tears. She whispered, "I want to go home." Alarms wailed as 17 cells clicked open at once. The children staggered free, their monitors flatlining into silence. Lisa slammed the final command into the console, severing the system's spine. Sparks erupted, screens went black, and the warehouse plunged into chaos. Men shouted, guns lifted, but the floodlights blazed outside as F rammed the bus through the gates, horn blaring like a war cry. James grabbed a rifle dropped by one of the guards and covered the retreat, while Lisa shepherded the dazed children toward the bus. Danny dragged Emma toward the door, his heart hammering, his gift shrieking with one final warning. He turned and froze. At the far end of the warehouse, a single screen flickered back to life. A man in a dark suit sat in a boardroom without windows, his face shadowed but his eyes gleaming cold. He smiled faintly. "Well done," the man said, his voice calm, surgical. "I wondered how long it would take before one of you figured it out." Emma's blood ran cold. The man wasn't Victor. Victor was nothing but a pawn. This was something larger, something older. James shouted from the bus, "Move!" The children piled inside. Rafe slammed the doors, the engine growling as the bus rolled back into the night. Behind them, the warehouse burned, sparks snapping into the sky. But Emma couldn't shake the words. "Well done," the shadow had said, as though this was just the first move in a much larger game. Weeks later, Emma stood on the stage of the United Nations. She was only 8 years old, but her voice filled the hall with steady power. "Love," she said, "is the only network that can't be hacked. It's the only code that can't be corrupted." Danny stood beside her, no longer the hungry boy in the alley, but a son with a family, his gift a weapon now wielded for light. Lisa watched with pride. James sat in the front row, his hands clenched, his heart both broken and mended. Rafe waited in the wings, the quiet guardian who had chosen not to look away. The world believed the nightmare was over. The children were free. Victor was gone. The Harrison Foundation was born. But in a dark